G'day everyone. Today we're taking a look at some GWBasic games and the final version made in QBasic. These games were a clone of the PC booter game called Digger, which was quite a popular game back in the 80s, made by Windmill Software. It just so happens that I also made a clone of Digger back when I was in my early teens, mostly because the version of Digger that I'd had played and managed to get a copy of was made for the Tandy 1000, because that's what my cousins had on their computer. And so obviously it wouldn't run on our much faster 20 MHz 386. So that's why I ended up making a clone. This person here, Navin Ipe, sorry if I've mispronounced your name, I almost certainly have. He made a clone of Digger for similar reasons. So if we look down here at the bottom, if I can get it to scroll to the right place, Digger was one of his primary motivations for getting into games programming, and he'd been playing it, say, 1994 to 1995. That's quite interesting, because when you think about it, by then Digger would have been quite outdated, but it was certainly still quite a fun game. Anyhow, Navin has made for us 3 different versions of the game to try out today. Digger.bas is the first version he created. He says it's a bit crude, but I think in some ways he has actually managed to reproduce more of the mechanics of Digger than I did. But he found that the monsters he made would get stuck very easily, and the exterminator monster would turn up very quickly. We'll see that when we play it. Advanced Digger is a bit more clever. I've actually had a go at these already, so I know a little bit about what we're in for. He's actually come up with a better idea for the monsters following you, and hopefully that should result in better gameplay. It does for the most part. And the last one, Digger Forever, that one was programmed on a roommate's PC, and that one actually has graphics. That one is made on QBasic, so that one looks a bit different. From what I've seen of that one, it requires quite a fast computer to get much speed out of it. I think that's just basically because QBasic is a little bit slow when it comes to graphical games. It can be done, it can be made to work fast, but in this particular case it is not fast. So let's fire up one of the games and get stuck right in. Taking a look at the first Digger game, we can see that there's a few problems when we load it up into GWBasic. The first problem is that it's trying to use screen 12, which is something that GWBasic doesn't have. This leads me to believe that the game was later modified in QBasic, which does support screen 12. Another minor issue I had was, after loading it from GitHub and having to use DOS2 Unix on it, it omitted the last line when I loaded it into BASIC. That was simply just a return command, so I just added that here. With those issues sorted out, it does actually work quite well. There are a few glitchy moments, such as the sacks falling when they shouldn't, or not being able to move or have things displayed incorrectly, but it does for the most part work quite well. For a first attempt at making a Digger clone, it's pretty good, but there are some obvious issues that make this less fun than it could be. The first one being the controls. To move a tile, you have to press the key. You can't hold it down though, you have to press it each time you want to move one tile, so you end up having to hammer the key to move any real distance. This leads to very tired fingers, but it does allow you to move faster than the enemy does, which is kind of a bonus. I also gave it a try with the QBasic interpreter to see if anything was much different, and it turns out there are some slight differences. For instance, it does draw the entire screen properly now, and the enemy seems to move much slower. Other problems like the glitchiness and the controls still remain, so it is very similar to playing it on GWBasic. Next I took a look at Advanced Digger. This one is a little different in the sound department as well as the game mechanics. First off, let's just take a quick listen to what it's like with the sound on. Yeah, it's really annoying sound, so I recommend you turn the sound off with this particular one. Without the sound on though, it is quite a good game. The controls are better for a start. You no longer have to hammer the key to move around. You press an arrow key once to move in that direction, and the digger keeps moving until you either hit an obstacle or change direction. This does mean that you can't move faster than the enemies just by simply hammering the keys faster though, so there is that disadvantage. The new and improved mechanics are what makes this version more advanced than the previous one. The first major improvement is the removal of glitches from the previous game. Things such as the money sacks or drop bullets now behave correctly. You can push them, and you can push them down a hole to help you crush your enemies. The main enemy's behaviour has also changed. It follows the breadcrumbs that you leave behind rather than just sort of following an invisible trail. This makes it a little bit easier for you to predict where it's going to go. You can use this to your advantage by constructing a breadcrumb trail that will make it take a longer path. This doesn't always work out the best way that you'd like, but it certainly is possible. Once the white monster reaches the end of a breadcrumb trail and can no longer follow any, it will wait for a while before turning into a black monster. The black monster basically tracks you directly, and if it runs into a new breadcrumb trail, it will convert back into a white monster and resume the chase that way. In this version of the game, you can shoot at the enemies, but you do run out of ammunition if you don't conserve it. You can increase your ammunition if you collect the remains of one of the drop bullets after it has fallen some distance. This is useful so that you can shoot more, basically, particularly important when the exterminator turns up. The exterminator is a particularly difficult enemy to deal with. It tracks your movement pretty precisely, making it difficult to avoid. You can crush it with a drop bullet or shoot it with a bullet directly, but I found that that can be quite difficult to achieve. So the best way I've found to deal with it is actually to get it to run under one of the drop bullets itself, being crushed almost instantaneously. This does require a bit of luck, and to have some of them remaining in the level. Of course, it immediately respawns, so any respite you get is very short-lived. Once you've collected all the diamonds, a portal appears to take you to the next level. There are only 5 in total, so once you finish the 5th one, you get this nice end screen. And then the game is done. I found it actually quite difficult to get here, so it's certainly quite challenging. The last of the 3 games is made for QBasic and was made by Navin in 2014. Quite recent when you think about it. This game is a little bit slow, so I recommend you run it with a higher DOSBox cycle count. The other option you have is to run it with the Quick Basic Interpreter rather than the QBasic one, as I found that one seems to be a little bit faster. The main improvement that Navin has made here is converting it into a graphical game and polishing it so that it's got things like help and a high score table. In terms of mechanics, it's very similar to the advanced digging game, except some of the things have different names, such as the exterminator, which in this one is called the Mad Monster. One minor mechanical change that has been made is the standard monster, the cool monster, never has any trouble with pathfinding, so it never changes into a monster which tracks you directly. Because of this, and the smaller play area, and the lack of visual breadcrumbs, it's actually much harder to trick these standard monsters into taking a longer path and getting lost, thus making it much more difficult to avoid them. This and the Mad Monster turning up sooner make this version of Navin's Digger a bit harder overall. I quite like this set of 3 games made by Navin, as all three of them show the development process starting out from a more primitive idea and the construction and development of it into something more advanced, into something final that looks a lot more polished. Of the three games, I think I enjoyed playing the advanced version of Digger the most. Even though it was in text mode, it was faster than the graphical one, and it was less glitchy and difficult to play than the first one, whilst also retaining all of the cool new mechanics that Navin had made. The source code for all three of these games is available on Navin's GitHub, which I will link in the description below. I found that you have to use Unix to DOS to make it loadable in GWBasic or QBasic natively, because it's missing the DOS carriage return characters which are required for the interpreter, but otherwise it should work quite well. That's all from me today. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.